Have you ever met someone who can recite every historical date from a textbook, but somehow struggles to put together a simple piece of furniture? Or perhaps you've seen the opposite, someone who never finished school but can fix a car engine just by looking at it. This is where we have to draw a clear line between being uneducated and having a low IQ. Knowledge is simply the collection of facts you have stored in your brain, like files on a hard drive. Intelligence, however, is the processor. It is your brain's ability to take new, confusing information, make sense of it, and solve a problem you've never seen before. Understanding these signs isn't about being judgmental. It's about understanding how the world works and how to navigate different types of people. If you find this deep dive into the human mind fascinating, you should join our community. Subscribing helps you stay informed on the psychological why behind human behavior, and we would love to have you along for the journey. Identifying these habits can actually help you communicate better and avoid unnecessary stress in your daily life. It all starts with how a person handles ideas that aren't physically standing right in front of them. Imagine trying to explain the concept of justice or opportunity cost to someone who only understands things they can physically touch, see, or smell. This is the hallmark of a struggle with abstract reasoning. People with higher cognitive ability can easily play with what-if scenarios in their minds. They can take a hypothetical situation, run it through a mental simulation, and predict an outcome without ever having to actually do it. However, one of the most consistent habits of those with a lower IQ is a heavy reliance on concrete thinking. They live almost entirely in the here and now, which makes it incredibly difficult for them to grasp metaphors, symbolism, or complex logical sequences. To a concrete thinker, a bird in the hand is literally just a bird in a hand. They often miss the deeper meaning behind life's lessons because they are focused on the literal details rather than the underlying principle. This is why you might notice some people getting stuck on the small, irrelevant parts of a story while completely missing the main point. Their brains are working so hard to process the basic facts that there is no bandwidth left to analyze the logic behind them. If a situation changes even slightly from what they are used to, they often freeze or become frustrated because they lack the mental flexibility to apply a general rule to a specific new problem. This lack of logic also shows up in how they handle arguments or debates. Instead of following a thread of reasoning to its conclusion, a person struggling with abstract thought might jump to unrelated topics or rely on circular logic, essentially saying something is true simply because it is true. They aren't trying to be difficult. Their processor just isn't designed to hold multiple layers of a logical chain at once. When you observe this, you start to see why some people seem to make the same illogical choices over and over again. They aren't seeing the invisible threads that connect their actions to the consequences. It's like trying to navigate a city without a map. They are reacting to every turn as it comes, rather than understanding the layout of the streets. This fundamental gap in how someone views the world is often the first real sign that their cognitive processing is hitting a ceiling. One of the most efficient shortcuts the human brain uses to navigate life is pattern recognition. It is the ability to look at a chaotic situation, find the underlying order, and predict what happens next. This is essentially the brain's shorthand. For those with high cognitive ability, this happens almost instantly. If they see a specific sequence of events lead to a failure, they store that pattern and avoid it in the future. However, a major indicator of lower IQ is a consistent failure to recognize these patterns. Instead of seeing life as a series of connected events, someone struggling in this area often views every new challenge as an isolated incident, completely unrelated to anything they have experienced before. This lack of pattern recognition is why you might see certain people making the exact same mistake 10 times in a row, even when the solution seems obvious to everyone else. Their brains aren't linking the cause to the effect. In a psychological setting, this is often tested using visual puzzles where you have to guess the next shape in a sequence. While a high IQ individual sees the logic, perhaps the shape rotates 90 degrees or changes color, a person with lower processing power sees a jumble of disconnected images. In the real world, this translates to poor problem solving. When faced with a broken appliance a difficult social dynamic, or a complex work task, they tend to use a trial and error method that is heavy on the error and light on the learning. Because they can't see the pattern, they often become overwhelmed by complexity. If a problem has more than two moving parts, their mental buffer fills up and they experience a sort of cognitive gridlock. They might lash out in frustration or simply give up, labeling the task as impossible rather than breaking it down into logical steps. This is also why they may struggle with humor or sarcasm. Both require the brain to quickly recognize a pattern of speech and then spot the intentional break in that pattern. Without that recognition, the world feels unpredictable and confusing. They aren't just missing the joke, they are missing the framework that makes the joke work. This inability to connect the dots doesn't just make school or work harder, it makes every day a series of brand new, confusing hurdles that they never quite learn how to jump over efficiently. In the world of psychology, intelligence is often closely linked to a personality trait known as openness to experience. This is the natural drive to ask why things are the way they are. Highly intelligent people tend to be chronically curious. They want to peek behind the curtain and understand the mechanics of the world. On the other hand, a very common habit among those with lower cognitive ability is a noticeable lack of intellectual curiosity. For these individuals, the world is often accepted exactly as it appears on the surface. They rarely wonder about the how or the why of a situation. If a machine works, they use it. If it breaks, they discard it. There is no internal urge to investigate the cause or learn the system. This lack of curiosity often manifests as a rigid, closed-minded approach to life. Because processing new complex ideas requires a lot of mental energy, a brain with lower capacity will often reject unfamiliar information simply to save effort. It is a defense mechanism. It is much easier to say, that's just the way it is, or that's how I've always done it, than it is to deconstruct a long-held belief and build a new one based on fresh evidence. This is why you might notice that some people are incredibly resistant to change, even when that change is clearly beneficial. They aren't necessarily being stubborn for the sake of it. They are protecting themselves from the mental exhaustion that comes with learning something new. Furthermore, this habit leads to a very narrow range of interests. While a high IQ individual might jump from learning about deep-sea biology to ancient history just for the fun of it, someone with lower intellectual drive tends to stick to the familiar and the repetitive. They prefer entertainment that doesn't challenge them and conversations that stay within the lines of what they already know. When you present them with a new perspective or a challenging fact, they may become defensive or simply shut down. They see a different point of view not as an opportunity to grow, but as a confusing threat to their mental stability. This intellectual stagnation is a major red flag because it shows that the person has reached a point where their brain is no longer looking to expand, but is merely trying to maintain the status quo. Have you ever given someone a simple set of directions, perhaps 3 or 4 steps, only to have them come back 5 minutes later, having failed at the very first one? This isn't always a matter of being lazy or distracted. It often points to a limitation in something psychologists call working memory. Think of working memory as the RAM of the human brain. It is the mental workspace where we hold and manipulate information for a short period. A person with high cognitive ability can hold several pieces of data at once, juggle them, and execute a plan. However, one of the most visible habits of someone with a lower IQ is the inability to process more than 1 or 2 instructions at a time. When you provide a complex, multi-step task, a lower capacity brain quickly reaches its limit. If you say, go to the store, grab the blue folder, call John to verify the price, and then meet me at the office, the person might only remember, go to the store or grab the folder. The rest of the information simply falls off the edge of their mental shelf. Because they cannot visualize the entire sequence of events from start to finish, they tend to get overwhelmed and glitch halfway through the process. You might see them standing still, looking confused, or performing the task in a completely illogical order. This struggle also extends to planning for the future. Intelligence is closely tied to the ability to see several steps ahead, like a chess player anticipating moves. A person with lower cognitive processing power often lives in a one-step reality. They react to the immediate problem right in front of them without considering how that reaction will affect the next 3 steps of the plan. This leads to a life filled with emergencies that could have been easily avoided with a little bit of foresight. In a professional setting, this manifests as a need for constant supervision. They can handle a repetitive single-step job, but as soon as the task requires them to coordinate multiple variables or think ahead to next week, the system breaks down. They aren't trying to be difficult. Their mental workspace is simply too small to hold the entire map of the project at once. This constant short-circuiting when faced with complexity is one of the most telling signs of a lower cognitive ceiling. The strangest thing about human intelligence is that the less of it you have, the more you tend to think you're a genius. This isn't just a personality quirk. It's a psychological phenomenon known as the Dunning-Kruger Effect. It happens because the very skills you need to be good at something are the exact same skills you need to realize you're bad at it. People with lower IQ often lack metacognition, which is the ability to step back and think about their own thinking. Because they can't see the full complexity of a subject, they assume the subject is simple and that they have already mastered it. You have likely met someone who speaks with absolute certainty about topics they clearly don't understand, from complex economics to medical science. While a highly intelligent person is often full of doubt because they know just how much they don't know, a person with lower cognitive ability is often trapped on Mount Ignorant. They are so blind to their own limitations that they mistake their lack of confusion for expertise. They aren't lying to you. They genuinely believe they are the smartest person in the room. This habit makes it nearly impossible for them to take constructive criticism. Since they believe they are already performing at a high level, any feedback or correction feels like a personal attack rather than an opportunity to improve. This creates a competence ceiling where they stop growing because they don't believe there is any room left to grow. They stay stuck in their ways, loudly defending wrong answers, simply because they lack the mental tools to detect their own errors. This misplaced confidence is perhaps the loudest social signal of a lower cognitive capacity. After looking at these behavioral patterns, the big question remains, is someone's intelligence a fixed number carved in stone? Or can the mental engine actually be upgraded? To understand this, we have to look at the 2 different types of intelligence that make up your brain's power. First, there is fluid intelligence, which is your raw ability to solve new problems and think logically on the fly. Then, there is crystallized intelligence, which is the massive library of knowledge and skills you build up over a lifetime. While it is true that your raw fluid intelligence is largely determined by genetics and early development, your crystallized intelligence has no ceiling. The brain is remarkably plastic, a concept known as neuroplasticity. This means that while you might not be able to fundamentally change the processor speed you were born with, you can absolutely optimize the software. By intentionally practicing critical thinking, engaging in complex hobbies, and forcing yourself to stay curious, you can develop habits that mimic high intelligence. The danger for those with lower cognitive ability is giving up on growth. If someone accepts their habits as just who they are, they stop building the neural pathways that allow for better problem solving. True intelligence isn't just a score on a test, it's a commitment to being less wrong today than you were yesterday. Even if a person starts with a smaller mental workspace, they can learn to organize that space so efficiently that they outperform people who are naturally smarter but lazy. Understanding these signs is the first step towards self-awareness, and self-awareness is the ultimate tool for personal evolution.